Imagine your rent doubling overnight. Would you fight or flee? For millions of people, that's not a hypothetical. That's their reality. So how does it happen so fast? Today I'm going to tell you why, but I'm also going to talk about the opportunity that people on both sides have. Have you ever heard of opportunity zones? Before I get into that, we're going to talk about what is causing the problem. I'm sure by now you've heard of gentrification, but for those that don't know, I want to give you two definitions. I work in real estate, so I see both sides of the coin in this situation. So definition number one, the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new businesses, typically displacing current inhabitants in the process. Number two, the process of making someone or something more refined. So there's two ways you can look at gentrification. And for me, I grew up in the hood. I don't live in the hood now, but for those that know, they know all the good food is in the hood. So my parents were military. When I didn't live with my parents on a military base, I grew up in the hood with my grandmother on food stamps. We had a 2-bedroom shack that my grandfather and my uncle built. We had a tin roof. I understand. So that's why the way that I look at things, since I'm in real estate now, I can understand the need for going into certain neighborhoods and improving those neighborhoods. But it comes at a cost. So if you do live in a neighborhood, kind of like the one that I just mentioned with my grandmother growing up in a neighborhood like that, wouldn't you want someone to come in and make it better? Yes, you would. Does it have to come at a price that prices you out of your own neighborhood? No, it shouldn't. And that's why I'm going to talk about opportunity zones in a second, because if you know what that can do for a neighborhood like we're talking about, and what the benefit of a person who is the person investing in that neighborhood can get from doing opportunity zones, you might be like, why aren't more people doing this, or why am I not doing this myself? So the main issues that people have when it comes to gentrification in their neighborhood, long-term residents often get priced out when new development floods the area. Rising rents always makes forced moves, which again, that's kind of like if you live in an apartment complex and they come in, or if you have a landlord and they come in and they fix up the property, they paint the outside of the house, they do some lawn care, or they come in inside and they do an entirely new renovation. That costs money. So it's like tenant improvements. Who pays the tenant improvements if you live in an apartment complex? Generally, those improvements are passed along through rising costs and rents. It's unfortunate that that happens, but the people living in an apartment complex, maybe not all, but most people want those improvements to that place, especially if they've been there for a long time. But who should pay for that? So this is where my hat comes in from being an investor and understanding, okay, yes, the property is, you don't want to be a slumlord. So you want to come in, and if it costs you $50,000, and you might be like, okay, well, I've been paying rent for however many years. Yeah, that's true. But on the other side of that, who knows what the person is paying in the mortgage cost? No one knows. So just because a person is paying mortgage, say for instance, the mortgage is $1,500 and the person is paying $1,700 in rent. That landlord is only getting $200. And if they drop $50,000 per unit, you know how long it'll take for that person to see that money back. So that's kind of why you have to increase the prices on the rent. I know it's unfortunate, and you're like, okay, well, I don't know. I don't know what people think in situations like that. But I just gave you an example on why the prices have to go up. I'm not gonna lie. Yes, when you go into an urban neighborhood and you see a Whole Foods or like a Trader Joe's coming in, then you know there's some wealthy people coming in there. It's unfortunate though, again, based on what I just said, that sometimes the rent goes from $1,200 to like $2,200. You know what I mean? That's kind of one of the things that I don't like about gentrification, because I think those people, back to what I was saying about opportunity zones, I know they're going into these particular neighborhoods, but are they taking advantage of what the opportunity zones offer? So there's going to be a link in the description for what opportunity zones are and how you can take advantage of it. So I think that's one of the main issues that I have. Like, I'm not against tenant improvements, but I'm against it if a person's coming in and they're not thinking about the people that are currently living there and how it's going to affect their lives. Especially if you have something like opportunity zones that you can take advantage of to make sure you don't have to raise the rents as high as that they raise, to make sure that you don't have to raise the rent as high as they raise them in some of those areas. One of the second things that I've noticed is that taxes rise with property values going up. So a homeowner may be forced to sell because they can't keep up with the property taxes as they increase. And again, once you start bringing in money, it goes back to comps. If a person sells a house, if there's a house in the neighborhood and most homes are selling for like $150,000. The property taxes aren't going to be that bad. But say you come in and you fix up the property and you buy 3 or 4 properties, and now you've increased the value in the area. So those homes that were worth 150 are not going to be worth 350, just a hypothetical number. If you do a lot of tenant improvements, you come in and rehab the entire house, you add some square footage, you throw in another bathroom. So that now shifted the comps in the area. So that's going to make property taxes go up. So again, when you start bringing in people with more money, they start doing tear downs if they find a house, which is very common in LA. In LA, I'll ride through a neighborhood and I'll be like, you will see a brand new house with a Range Rover outside, Mercedes, and then the house next to it this house is 2 stories. The house next to it, 1 story, grass growing up. So that's one of the things about living in an area that doesn't have an HOA, because a person can come in and do a tear down and build up a mansion, and now it's going to increase the property taxes in the entire neighborhood, or at least within a radius of maybe 0.5 to a 1 mile radius. And so that's what shifts the comps. And so from an investment standpoint, when you're an investor, you want to shift the comps. You want to go in the neighborhood, and it sucks, but this is just part of the process. You want to go in the neighborhood and you want to shift the comps, because once you buy the first house and you rehab it and you fix it up, you're going to try to go to the next house in the neighborhood and do the same thing, because now you know if you can get a house at 150, do a lot of improvement to it, get it to 350. I mean, you just put $200,000 worth of equity into a property. And so if you can do that through a whole entire neighborhood, you're going to win. But again, it goes back to gentrification. That's unfortunate that happens, but that's a part of the process. But again, I'm going to keep saying opportunity zones because I want you all to find out what that is. Just real quick, if a person does an opportunity zone in a neighborhood like we're talking about right now, if you would have got into this in 2019, you wouldn't have had to pay taxes for 10 years. And so that's why I keep bringing this up, because there's so many advantages. We'll get to that later. The next thing that happened, community identity shifts. Local culture, small businesses and families often disappear as wealthier newcomers come in. Goes back to what I just said. It's so funny because I was having this conversation the other day with a friend. Grocery stores choose the neighborhoods that they want to go in. One of my friends lives around the corner and they live in a neighborhood that's not so good. And they're, people are talking about they want a Trader Joe's to come in there. And I'm like, Trader Joe's does not come in there. I promise you that, because they know. And it's, again, I'm just telling the truth, right? The truth hurts. So if you see a Trader Joe's coming in from an investment standpoint, or a Whole Foods, you light up because you like, oh man, they just dropped the Whole Foods. You know what time it is. And for anyone that's trying to get into real estate and you don't know anything about it, take the tip that I just gave you. If you see a lot of construction, if you see particular nice grocery store, depending on the area that you live in, starting to drop in, then you might want to start looking into that neighborhood to see if you can find some properties going in foreclosure, or people that are just trying to sell, because then you know what's going to happen to that market is about to shift. But again, goes back to community identity shifts. Once it starts to happen, it's hard. It's hard to undo when that stuff starts to take place, because there's a great chance that there's going to be speculation with people like myself or BlackRock or some hedge funds that are following these metrics that I'm talking about. Are well known in the real estate industry, what you look for when you're deciding to go into a community. So yeah, community identity shifts. But if a person is in this area and they are making money with a small business, somehow they can possibly stay alive. Maybe they can start increasing their prices, maybe not a lot, but enough to where they can keep up with the pace of what's changing in the community. That's one thing that I could say could possibly happen. That's not always the case, but I don't know if small business owners in these neighborhoods have the foresight or the financial acumen to even think about doing something like that to keep pace with what's coming in. Generally, the people that come in the neighborhood like me, again, I don't live in the hood, but I love going there for food. So if you have people that have more money, that are starting to come in there, you can raise your prices up, because the people that are coming in there now can also afford higher prices. One of the next thing that I did see is landlords cash out, tenants get pushed out. Many tenants face non-renewals or steep hikes when landlords sell or reposition. Back to what I just said. So when you're buying a property, and I've done this a couple times, where you buy a property, I just had this conversation with a group of mine that are buying properties in Oklahoma City. When you change ownership, you're not required to leave the tenants that are in there. It's an option for you to leave them in there. if you have a heart, you can be like, you know what? I'm not kicking this person out. I'm going to go in here and let them know. But at the same time, a person that has been living in a place for like 10 or 15 years and the rent hasn't increased has to expect the rent to go up somewhat when you have someone taking over. And it's got to be fair. You can't expect to be paying $400 for 20 years. It happens, but it's rare. So, I mean, when you're in a situation where you're on the other end of this, you kind of got to be mindful of the person that's taking over, right? They put in money just like you've been putting in money over the course of time. And the person that you were renting the house out to, they bought the house and they kind of want their money back. So again, I think you got to see both sides of the coin. Like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of part of the game if you don't own your own property. And that's why I think, I'm going to say it again, you should look into opportunity zones, because you yourself might be one of those people that are doing this to someone else. And you kind of understand it a little bit better when you're going through the process on your own. So if you're buying a property and you have to go in there and kick someone out, give them a timeline. Let them know. I ran into this situation where I took over a property in a particular neighborhood and I didn't kick the person out before I bought the house. I ended up having to evict this person and it took 120 days because they were already in there. So this is the reason why when this stuff does happen, changes happen so fast, people get kicked out or they get priced out because they're not going to renew your lease because they want you to be out. They want to be able to increase the price to where it makes sense because they dropped $75,000 per unit. You know what I mean? And if you don't want to get out or you don't want to adhere to the tenant improvements, what do you expect that person to do? Which leads me to my next point and final point. And then I'm going to get into opportunity zones. There are ways to protect yourself, kind of like what I just said. Negotiating longer leases, understanding tenant rights, and exploring ownership options early. If you follow the trend, if you see cranes, if you see a lot of construction coming in, then you got to understand, get on top of it before it happens. In LA, in Inglewood, I got a couple of friends that live in Inglewood. One of my friends' moms lives in Inglewood. So I go to Inglewood often. I go there to get Jamaican food or different types of food. One thing that I did notice, they dropped in a train that ran from, I think it was downtown to Santa Monica through Inglewood, all the way through to the airport. I think it's called the Blue Line Belt, or I don't know what it's called. When they started doing this, I knew it was about to change. I knew that Inglewood was about to shift. When they talked about putting the Clippers arena there, I saw it coming. So then I remember one time I was going to my friend's mom's, passing by his mom's house, and I saw a bunch of like cones. They were redoing the roads. I'm like, here it is. So you can see it coming. So then I started looking at properties in Inglewood. I started looking at properties in downtown Inglewood. I started looking at multifamilies. The thing about it back then, these properties it was like a 16 unit only going for $1 million. This thing today is worth probably like 4.5. So when you start to see, or you start, pay attention to your neighborhood. I don't want to say, be on the city council website all the time, but I'm just saying, if you start looking around and you start seeing cranes or you start seeing dirt and they're doing, clearing it off, they're starting to build different things. They're starting to gentrify the neighborhood, which again is in your favor, but you also want to be in front of it to possibly talk to your landlord and try to negotiate a lease up front for 2 years because you see it, you're paying attention to what's going on. The second thing you want to do, start looking for a house because the prices are going to go up. Maybe you can't afford a house, but if it's your first time buying a house because you're living in an apartment or you're paying rent to a landlord who owns a house, try to do a subject to with the house that you're in. Try to do a lease option with the house that you're in, but start looking for different ways to not be in a situation when the time comes and your landlord wants to sell, or when the rent starts to go up. If you lock in a lease for 2 years, your landlord just can't come in there and be like, hey, I'm raising your rent. Even if you don't have the situation right now, maybe you can negotiate some kind of, rent cap with your landlord right now that we're talking about, or that you're watching this video. Be like, hey, you want to talk to your landlord about rent control as soon as possible. And if you don't have it now, in LA, this is a big thing. You want to move into a place that's like, we're only going to raise the rent 5 or 6% year over year. I remember at one point I had an apartment when I first moved to LA. The rent was $1,300. By the time I left, it was only $1,650. And that was over the course of like 7 or 8 years because we had rent control. It wasn't going up that much. I rented that place out. I had it for $1,650 and I subleased it to a friend of mine for $1,850. And then by the time he left, the rent was $2,500. So think about that. I moved into this place. The rent was $1,350. And then by the time I moved out after about 5 or 6 years, it was $1,650. And then by the time my friend left, it was $2,350 or $25 or some crazy number. And I'm like, and that was over the course of maybe 7 or 8 years. So I don't know if the rent cap or the rent control got displaced or whatnot. I don't know what happened, but I just know that that's a crazy amount within a short amount of time. So you want to make sure that you do some kind of rent control with your landlord, even if you are living in a house. These are different things that you just should have a conversation about with your landlord. And then understand tenant rights in your neighborhood. Figure out what that is. Figure out what that is in the city. Reach out to someone within the city council or whoever you have to. Go on ChatGPT. You can look it up. I mean, stuff is so easy to find nowadays. Understand what your tenant rights are in your area. And then know when someone comes to you, you can be like, you know what? You can't kick me out, right? Or understand what your eviction process is. Understand that squatter rights. I'm not telling you to be a squatter, but I'm just saying there are situations where I'm dealing with that. If you heard me talk about it on a previous podcast, I got someone living in my basement, right? So understand what your rights are as a tenant, and then be ready. Be ready if this comes to you. Be ready. Be ready. So what do they say? Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Anyway, so now we're going to talk about opportunity zones and how you can take advantage of them as an investor, or how an investor can take advantage of being able to do what you want to do as far as going into certain neighborhoods and increasing prices, but be fair, because you can get tax write-offs. You can write off some of this stuff so you don't have to increase the rent so much. An opportunity zone, by definition, is a program created during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to revolutionize economically distressed communities through private investment as opposed to taxpayer dollars. Opportunity zones have now been designated in all 50 states. So if you're in a particular state, figure out the zip codes where the opportunity zones are. It's gonna more so be in the neighborhoods that I'm talking about right now. So if you know those areas, which most people should know, if you live in the city, I hope you know some of the worst parts to go so you don't go there. But secondly, from a standpoint of if you want to get into real estate, this is going to be the best place for you to start because the prices are going to be a lot lower than you trying to start out in an affluent neighborhood. So I'm going to give you the time horizon for opportunity zones so you know what that 10-year run looks like, because I honestly think it's going to expire in 2029, but I honestly think that they're going to extend it even more because it just makes so much sense. So year 1 through 5, you can roll over any capital gains into an opportunity fund to defer the tax gain. What that means is if you flip a property, it's almost like a 1031 exchange. You can roll over your capital gains into an opportunity fund so you can invest into another property without having to pay taxes on that money. Generally, if you have capital gains tax, it's going to be about 25 to 35% of what you have to pay on the gains. So for an example, what I just gave you guys before, that 350 and that 150. If you find a property for 150 and you turn around and sell it for 350, you're going to have to pay taxes on that $200,000 because that's the gain between what you paid for it and what you've increased the equity into the property. So you're going to have to pay the taxes on that $200,000. So that could be 25 or 35%. That's a lot for you to have to pay to the government for them not doing anything. And this is why I think opportunity zones are great for people that are trying to get into real estate. It's almost like a 1031 exchange, but it's a little bit different as far as tax code and what you kind of got to do for with the funds. I'm not a CPA, and you can ask one of those what you got to do as far as that goes. Once you get to year 5, deferment of payment of capital gains until December 31st, 2026. So again, that's kind of coming up to the timeline for people that started back then, but they're gonna extend it. I'm sure they are. When 2026 hits, reduction of taxes owed by up to 15% after 7 years. That's huge. If it goes back to what I just said, instead of you paying 25 or 35%, now you only got to pay up to you get 15% off basically. And then once you get to year 10, zero tax on gains earned at all. That's crazy. So like to be able to buy a property, and if you're trying to build a portfolio out, you're gonna be in it for at least 10 years. So you can see how this is an amazing opportunity for people who want to get into real estate. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much the property costs. There's no minimum investment. It's just you being able to go into these neighborhoods, find properties that could be worth $40,000 or $50,000 and do what I just said. It's a win-win. So you don't have to be like, I need a lot of money. No, you can partner up with your friends or get a group of people that you know and create an opportunity zone fund. So this is what I think you should be doing. And we all have an issue with gentrification, which makes sense based on everything that I just said, because some people don't have the ability. Some people don't have the money. Sometimes there are a bunch of old people that lives in these neighborhoods who can't do what I just said. And that's why I think it's on the investor or the person going into this neighborhood to take advantage of the opportunity zone so they can not displace this old person. You know what I mean? But there's gotta be advantages on both sides. And so again, this is why I said I can see it from both sides. I grew up in it. I go there all the time. My family still lives in the hood, depending on where they are. So I get it. But I also understand from the perspective of I'm putting my money into a property to make it better for you. I'm changing this entire neighborhood to make it better for everybody. Even though we're gonna have some wealthier people coming in, that doesn't change the fact that the people that are living here now are gonna be able to take advantage of it as well. So don't see it as a bad thing. Look at it. I always talk about reframing from a mindset perspective. Reframe how you look at gentrification and see it from all sides and see how you yourself can take advantage of it and do your own thing. Go into a neighborhood. Maybe you don't have the money right now, but get together with someone so you can be a person who is doing tenant improvements for someone and leaving them in the house and doing the exact opposite of what's going on right now and why people have an issue with this particular word. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna show you all a map. This is the economic disparity between opportunity zones and other areas. Look at this. It doesn't matter where you are in the 50 states. There is a zone that you can take advantage, even if you're investing out of state. You know, we're looking in Oklahoma right now. I mentioned that as far as one of my partners or the group that I'm a part of, we're investing in Oklahoma. And the prices there are like $65,000, $75,000, $80,000. My friend just left Nebraska. We just got done having a Zoom call with people that are in Nebraska. The beautiful thing about opportunity zones and the plan that I'm sharing with you all is that every neighborhood, you might have heard about group homes or something like that. If you get an opportunity zone property and you fix it up to the point of where you can just rent it out to a person who might be challenged in a different way. If you don't know about group homes, look up different group homes on how you can place people in a government or pay you. So for example, we're about to start doing group homes in Oklahoma and Nebraska, Arizona, and parts of San Diego. And you can get $1,300. You can get $1,300 per person who's staying in your property. So if you can find a property, like I just mentioned, if you live somewhere else, and you pay $65,000 or $70,000, you put $15,000 into it and you fix it up, you can get a tenant in there paying $1,300 a month on a property that's $75,000 or $80,000. Your mortgage is probably going to be $800. So don't worry about what if I get a property and I can't get someone to stay in it because it's in a particular neighborhood. There's always going to be a person. People are always going to need somewhere to stay. And then when you have programs that I just mentioned that the government are funding, you can easily get something like that. So I might do a whole podcast on group home. I might do a whole episode on group homes with a friend of mine so we can break down the process. And if you want me to do something like that, leave it in the comments below. But I'm gonna break down a strategy on how you can find properties in these opportunity zones, take advantage of the tax benefits, and then get money from the government. So the government will throw money at things that they need done, but they don't want to do it or they don't have the funds to do it. The government doesn't have any money, right? They're running a $2 trillion deficit right now. But do we need more housing? Yes, we do. Is mental health and things like that on the rise? Mental health issues on the rise? Yes, it is. So if you can find properties in areas that I just mentioned, it's a win-win. And people always wonder, how do people not pay taxes? They do real estate. They do things like that. They do real estate. They do things like They do real estate. They do things like I just mentioned on finding properties like this, doing 1031 exchanges, keeping that property, going and getting into a group home situation and you put someone in it, and then boom, you're getting paid by the government to pay off your house. And then you did a did it in an opportunity zone where you don't have to pay any taxes. And then you did a 1031 exchange where you roll those funds into another property. So you're basically going to keep buying real estate for free for as long as you want. So again, this is why I'm so big on opportunity zones. This is why I'm so big on real estate. And this is why I just wanted to shoot a video on gentrification. And it's not a bad thing per se. As you can see, there's ways around it. There's benefits. So I'm going to put this link in the description below. If not, go to the investfar.com website, look for the opportunity zones, and you'll see this there. Become an investor if you want. Invest with us. And there's a guide at the bottom of it. I'll put a link to that as well, or you can just go to the website and you can download the guide. It'll get sent to you, or you can just download it. But anyway, look at it differently. Reframe how you look at gentrification. Reframe how you look at real estate. Take advantage of the opportunities that come up. And until next time, take care.